Driving those thoughts away, there was little point in thinking about all that now. Carlyle snorted, telling himself that he had no reason to go after her now, and if Lionel saw him now, he would laugh at him. Carlyle took a couple of steps forward, intending to leave, but suddenly stopped. Behind him was a bench where Asha was sitting with Decker. They were talking and sitting quite close to each other. He remembered Asha's smiling face and their closeness. He was worried if there really was nothing between them, because rumors said that they were even engaged at one time. Carlyle looked at this bench, and suddenly his thoughts switched from all this to his mother. This made him switch his thoughts to a more practical channel. Meanwhile, in the palace, Matthias was hysterical and said that they had to get Carlyle back as soon as possible, otherwise he would be sent to kill monsters. Wyverns were discovered in the south of the empire, and the knights wanted to take Matthias with them, but the empress gave them pathetic excuses, and Matthias was not released. The empress asked Matthias to calm down and not to panic, because she had everything under control. But Matthias was afraid for his life and did not want to calm down. He said that she was so calm because she was sitting in the palace all the time. He threatened that if he died, she would no longer be safe, so she better do something quickly. The empress frowned and sighed in irritation, calling a servant to them. The maid nodded obediently and took out a powder from her pocket that was supposed to help Matthias calm down. She carefully poured this powder into a glass of wine without spilling a crumb. After shaking the glass a little so that the powder would dissolve thoroughly, she moved the glass closer so that the empress could take it. Matthias was not feeling well. The empress tried to calm him down and said that it would be better if he drank this glass first. Matthias hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the glass sharply and drained it in an instant. The empress stroked his back and said that he was her heart, and she would do everything possible to ensure that he was not drawn into the battle. Matthias asked doubtfully if this was really so, and the empress assured him that it was so and nothing else. Matthias felt unwell and felt like the picture was floating, and he couldn't control it. Through the haze, he heard his mother say that he needed to rest. He fell asleep, and she stood next to him and looked at him with cold blood. She had an excellent plan so that he would not be drawn into the battle. The servants moved Matthias's limp body onto the bed, while the empress continued to watch in silence. She ordered them to send a message to High Priest Gabriel and do it as soon as possible, as she planned to pay him a visit. Soon the empress arrived to the High Priest Gabriel. She stood with her back to him, as she did not yet know that he had arrived. He wished that God's blessing would always be with her. Thus he made known his coming, and she turned to him. She also greeted him with a smile and said that she was glad to meet him. The high priest asked how she was doing, and the empress replied that she was helping Matthias as he was going through hard times. She frowned, saying that His Majesty the Emperor was too kind and willing to entrust military power to a child without proper experience. The high priest said that if he remembered correctly, Matthias had never attended fencing lessons. The empress confirmed that this was indeed the case, because he was a very weak child, and now she felt guilty because his life was at stake. Gabriel calmly noted that Matthias was born under the star of Asphodelius, the god of beauty and love. The empress confirmed this and confidently stated that they must lure Carlyle out of Pervaz at all costs because he had abandoned all his duties and hidden there, and this was absurd. She asked hopefully if the high priest had any ideas on how to get Carlyle to leave those lands as soon as possible. Gabriel thought for a moment and said that at the moment it was quite a difficult task. They stood next to each other and both were silent. The empress was waiting for the high priest to speak. He clearly had ideas. He finally broke the silence and proposed the dissolution of the marriage as a reason for Carlyle to return to the capital. She was surprised to ask how exactly it was possible to dissolve a marriage, because it seemed to her that this was a practically impossible task. The high priest smiled slyly and said that there was a way to make the dissolution of the marriage quite possible. He said there are several reasons why a marriage can be considered illegal and dissolved, including deception, coercion, a sham marriage for profit, when parents are against the marriage, and when the couple deliberately avoids conceiving a child. Hearing the words about conception, the empress was incredibly happy, because it was clear that their marriage was a sham, and they did not plan to conceive a child. The high priest said that this was enough to invalidate the marriage, and asked if she could revoke the recognition of the imperial family. She said that it would not be difficult. The empress said that meetings with the high priest help clear the clouds, and that she would contact her spy in Pervaz to gather information. Meanwhile, night fell on Pervaz, and no one suspected that the empress intended to collect information about attempts to conceive offspring. A welcome dinner was held in Pervaz for the recently arrived Cecilia and Dorothea. Decker whispered to Asha that he never thought their castle would ever look like this, and she whispered to him that she knew exactly what he meant. She said that she, too, had not expected that a place so suitable for executions would one day be so magnificently transformed. They looked around and admired this transformation, which they could not have dreamed of before. Carlyle announced that since all the guests were assembled, it was time to begin their dinner. The servants served food, trying to serve all the guests and doing so with due care and respect. When the servant brought the plate with the dish to Decker and Asha, she looked at the dish with interest. Decker also looked at the dish in surprise and asked what it was, but Asha said that, like him, she had no idea. After trying it, she said that this meat was different from what she had tried last time. Cecilia smiled and said it was turkey, and that it would lose flavor and become tough if not cooked properly. But the skill of the local cook Carlyle had brought with him was undeniable. Cecilia asked Carlyle if she was telling the truth, and Carlyle replied indifferently that perhaps it was. Carlyle began cutting up his dish to remove any bones that might be found. Dorothea noted that there were unlikely to be any bones there, and that the legs and wings could be removed immediately. Carlyle nodded and took her advice, as it was obvious that she was right and her advice was appropriate. Asha noted that this would not be difficult if you knew the structure of a bird's skeleton. She also said that many people had tried this dish, and it was similar to ordinary poultry. Her words left Lionel and Giles slightly confused. Carlyle laughed, saying that he had met many people with different senses of humor, but what Asha said now was truly funny. He began to laugh out loud, causing some of those sitting at the table to feel awkward. The girls felt embarrassed, the men puzzled, because what Asha said was probably not something that was usually said at such a table. Asha just looked at Carlyle in confusion. She didn't think she said anything wrong. Carlyle laughed and began to calm down, and everyone just looked at him silently. Decker thought that even under these circumstances, Asha was only concerned about food. Asha was really interested in food, and was glad that Pervaz now had enough of it, and in the future there would even be an excess. Carlyle found this amusing, but he finally pulled himself together and stopped laughing. He looked around at everyone and said that it was time to start dinner. Lionel told Dorothea that he hadn't seen her for a long time because he lived in the East and it was quite difficult to meet someone. Carlyle asked Cecilia how she was doing. She smiled, thanked him for his concern, and said that she was doing well. Cecilia looked at Dorothea and asked why she had come here, whether she really wanted to see her father so much. Dorothea replied sheepishly that her father had a lot of work, and that was why she had come here to help. Cecilia feigned a start, pretending to be worried that Sir Rappelt had so much work. Cecilia said that many of the documents he was working with were extremely confidential, and she doubted that Dorothea would be able to help him with them. Dorothea didn't really like this conversation, but she smiled politely and said that she would only help with small errands. Giles countered that when it came to confidential information, he was more concerned about Cecilia, expressing doubt as to whether they could truly trust Dovetail completely. Cecilia assured him that the Dupre family was loyal to Carlyle, and the fact that she had gone so far was proof of that, but Giles expressed doubt that Cecilia might be a disposable card. Decker was shocked. He did not understand how a man could say such things so openly to a girl. Cecilia only chuckled, saying that Sir Rappelt was joking, since in social circles everyone knew what the name Cecilia Dupre was worth. But Rappelt continued to press his point, saying that he had heard that Cecilia was popular with men, but she calmly replied that all that was in the past. She said that Sir Rappelt probably knew the reason himself and looked meaningfully at Carlyle. Decker didn't like this conversation. He knew that Cecilia was hinting that she was a candidate for the crown princess, and he thought it was an incorrect reference since Asha was here. He looked at her with concern, worried about what she thought about all this and how it might affect her. But Asha didn't care at all. She just tried the excellent food and was incredibly happy about it. Decker asked worriedly if she was okay, but she said that everything was wonderful because the food was incredibly delicious. Decker said that was not what he meant, but when Asha asked him what he meant, he decided not to bring up the subject. But Asha decided to tear herself away from her food and look around to see what Decker was worried about. She saw a hidden battle between Cecilia and Dorothea, who were talking about books and trying to belittle each other with hints. Looking at them, Asha realized that although they were saying nice things to each other, the atmosphere was actually not very pleasant. Cecilia wanted to take a sip from her glass, but noticed Asha looking at her and stopped. She apologized and said in fear that she should not have spoken about her father in the presence of Countess Pervaz because Asha's father had died. Decker was becoming less and less pleased with this conversation, and he looked at Asha with concern again. But she was absolutely calm, and said that she also loved to talk about her father, and there was no need to worry about her. Then Cecilia expressed her curiosity. She said she had heard that he was a great man, but that a bad fate awaited him. Asha calmly said that he had won a victory by killing the enemy general, and as a reward for his military service, he had been given the title of Margrave of Pervaz. Cecilia didn't understand. She was openly provoking Asha, but she remained calm. She looked at Asha, and she was glowing with happiness, continuing to eat. Cecilia thought that either she was very good at hiding her emotions, or it was not about that at all. Cecilia decided to continue by saying that it was customary in wars in which members of the imperial family participated to grant titles to outstanding soldiers. Asha was surprised to learn that this was the custom, but Cecilia confirmed that she had heard that this was the custom. Asha asked Carlyle if it was true that he got all his achievements in the same way. Carlyle calmly cut the meat and had not interfered in their conversation until this moment. He said that since he had already eaten everything, maybe he should take some from others, and also asked Asha not to treat him like his father. Asha nodded and said that it was true, and she wouldn't do that because they were different people. She popped the piece of meat into her mouth, clearly not wanting Carlyle to take the food away from her. Cecilia watched how calmly Asha ate, and this caused her more and more misunderstanding. She tried a series of provocations, and none of them got through to this woman. She remained calm, and it was not a mask. Now Carlyle looked at her with well-concealed concern. He wondered if Asha was really okay, and if Cecilia's words and behavior had hurt her. He thought that everyone knew that Cecilia and Dorothea were competing for the title of Crown Princess. He saw that even Decker could figure it out, although from Carlyle's point of view, he was still not the brightest person. But looking at Asha, he realized that only she did not understand this, since she was not at all interested in this situation. He thought it was good that Asha wasn't clinging to him, but at the same time it upset him, and he felt like they should pretend to be a married couple more carefully in front of strangers. He remembered the contract, and it was true. They had to conscientiously fulfill the roles of husband and wife. He asked Asha if she remembered the family portrait they had talked about earlier. Asha reluctantly paused from her meal and said that she remembered this conversation and had not forgotten about it. Cecilia asked what portrait he was talking about, and Carlyle explained that since he was a member of the imperial family and had married, he had to send one portrait to the imperial archives and hang the other here. Cecilia didn't particularly like hearing this information, and Giles didn't expect to hear it either, but he didn't show it. He asked Lionel if he had managed to choose an artist. Lionel answered positively, saying that Fabian Ruscott had accepted the offer and would arrive soon. Dorothea said that Fabian Ruscott was a good choice, because he was an artist who had won the Imperial Salon Prize 3 times, and Cecilia supported this choice, saying that only he was worthy of painting Carlyle's portrait. Asha, listening to them, did not look cheerful or inspired. She was not motivated at all by these portraits, and they noticed her mood. Dorothea carefully asked if Asha would like to see another artist. Asha sighed, choosing the right words so as not to violate the terms of the contract. Looking at Carlyle, who was drinking wine, she said quite bluntly that it was very annoying. She explained that putting on all sorts of jewelry and a dress, sitting still for an hour, all this was immensely annoying and was not something she liked, and Carlyle, hearing this, laughed again. Dorothea looked at her silently. On one hand, she understood. On the other hand, she was surprised and delighted that Asha could talk about this so openly. Carlyle, having calmed down and stopped laughing, said that it was her duty as a member of the imperial family, and she should do everything in her power, even if it was unusual, and Asha only agreed with this. A servant approached Sir Rappelt from behind to inform him of the news received from the capital of the empire. He handed him the letter, saying that this message had come straight from the capital and that he had better read it as soon as possible. Rappelt took the letter and asked the servant to leave so that he could read the letter without the prying eyes of the servants. What he wrote shocked him, because the message said that the Empress wanted to annul the marriage in order to return Carlyle to the capital on the grounds of neglect of marital duties, and that she had evidence of this. Giles looked at Asha and Carlyle with apprehension. He knew that if this was true, then they urgently needed to prove that they were a real couple. He looked at how calm and indifferent they were towards each other, and began to worry that with things like this, no one would believe it. After reading the letter, all this information about the annulment of the marriage, Carlyle could not believe it and called it nonsense. Lionel noted that the support of the temple was absolutely necessary for the dissolution of the marriage, and this support was clearly not without it. Lionel assumed that this had already been agreed upon with the high priest Gabriel, since he had recently become close to this woman. Carlyle remembered that Gabriel had once said that for some reason he felt uncomfortable being with the Empress, but apparently the circumstances had now changed. Carlyle suggested that they go out and get some fresh air, and Lionel asked him where exactly he wanted to go. Carlyle said it would be better to just watch the harvest, as it was quite a significant event for the people of Pervaz. So they did. Saddling their horses, they headed off to watch the inhabitants of Pervaz harvest their crops, which were the first in a long time. Looking at the residents, Carlyle noted that it now looked like a populated area, and the health of the residents had improved significantly. Carlyle thought that after the food distribution, the number of deaths had decreased, and he had not originally imagined that the situation here was so bad. Carlyle remembered that the villagers wanted to hold a harvest festival at the end of the month. Lionel nodded, saying that this was the first harvest festival, and the Marchioness seemed very excited about it. Carlyle smiled as he imagined Asha's nervousness, and thought that sometimes she acted like a child. Lionel noted that people had been asking him how the holiday was celebrated, and he had informed them that on such a day they could relax, eat, drink, and dance all day. Carlyle said that was more or less the case, and asked if any help was needed with the organization. Suddenly they ran into Asha on the way. She was surprised to see them here and asked what they were doing here. The Duke tried to move his horse to the side so as not to block Asha's path, and greeted her briefly. Carlyle smirked and said that he was her husband, so it was no surprise that he would be here checking on her. He also said that he heard that this was her first harvest, and decided to come and check how things were going. Asha smiled and thanked him for thinking so much about Pervaz and doing so much for him. She honestly admitted that she hadn't expected it, and Carlyle expressed understanding that she had thought of him. The image she had created still played against him. He asked if the celebration would take place at the end of the month, and Asha confirmed it, saying that she would have a few questions for Lord Bailey. She continued with a smile, saying that it was unlikely that the celebration would be as luxurious as in the capital, but she really hoped that everyone would enjoy it. Carlyle joked that he just needed to take more alcohol, and then everything would go its own way. Asha laughed, saying that maybe that would happen. Carlyle smiled, thinking that he was right about her. Otherwise, Asha wouldn't have laughed so defenselessly in front of him. A few days later, Asha was preparing for the harvest festival and signing documents, with Decker and the butler helping her. Taking the assignments and the to-do list, the butler went to check that everything was properly prepared for the upcoming holiday and that nothing was missed. Decker wondered if there was too much of everything and if they had overdone the planning. But Asha told him that Carlyle had given them extra support, so Decker asked if it wouldn't be better to save the finances for something else. Asha shook her head. She said that they must have at least one such pleasant memory. She said that now that their land has a harvest, they should have a celebration, and she wants to remember everyone eating, drinking, and having fun, and it brought back memories with her father. She remembered asking him what he was going to do after the war, and he smiled and said it was surprising that she wasn't tired enough to ask such a thing. They both looked into the distance, at the sky, and then at the wounded. It was a rather sad and depressing picture, and for a while they were simply silent. Asha broke the silence by asking if it was really worth dreaming about something bright when the front line was so gloomy. Amir smiled, looking at her, and decided to answer his daughter's question, because she was right, and dreams were important. They helped them survive. He said that when the war was over, he wanted to harvest the crops and have a harvest festival. Asha became curious and asked what it was. Amir looked up at the sky and smiled dreamily as he explained that it was a festival that ensured that there would be no famine until next year's harvest. Asha let go of these memories with the hope that her father was happy in heaven because she would soon make his dream come true, and told Decker that according to this sign, next year they would be able to become even better, and perhaps many would feel even more attached to their native land. Cecilia was standing in the corner. She had come to see how they were preparing for the harvest festival and how prepared the Marquise was, and so she heard this whole conversation. Cecilia noted that Asha's sense of responsibility for Pervaz was much stronger than she initially thought, and she realized that Asha was devoted to this land and her family. As she left, she thought that if Asha had not been her rival for the position of crown princess, then perhaps they would have even found a common language. A new morning dawned in the capital. Rays of light penetrated through the beautiful windows and illuminated the interior of the castle. Vivian Lowry was very nervous. She was anxiously biting her nails and did not understand why her plan did not work, and she was unable to get pregnant. The maid hastened to console her, saying that having a child is not so easy and she should react more easily. But Vivian only snapped back, saying that she was in a difficult situation and didn't have much time, and she needed this child now, not some unknown time. She bit her lips and thought that if the second prince accumulated power, then someone like her would disappear and no one would even know about it. She wondered how long the Empress was going to use Matthias to gain powerful power. She remembered the situation in which she had set Carlyle up and thought that while he was in the palace, the second prince was a nobody, and that was a much better deal than what she had now. She was incredibly offended that the Empress had so brazenly used her for her own purposes, and now Vivian was at risk of destruction. The maid, worried about Vivian, asked if she should bring her some water. Vivian let her thoughts go and a little more calmly asked for some water. Vivian sighed and told herself that the Emperor favored her, and if she bore him a son, then she had every chance of winning. But Vivian understood that the Empress would not just sit idly by. She jumped up angrily, exclaiming that if only the crown prince had not been banished to Pervaz, the Empress could have been kept under control. Vivian was so angry that to somehow cope with her emotions, she grabbed the vase and smashed it. Exhaling, she decided that she had to give birth to a child as soon as possible. It was the only thing that could save her now. Matthias was walking around the palace and stopped when he heard two maids talking. They were discussing something quite actively, and he didn't even have to make much effort to hear their conversation. They said that Vivian was irritated because she couldn't get pregnant and had recently even broken a vase out of her frustration. Matthias hid behind a column, eavesdropping on the conversation. He didn't like the words about someone else's pregnancy. It seemed like a threat to him. He realized that Vivian wanted a child, and that this child could cause him problems in the future, so something had to be done. He immediately ran to his mother to tell her about this and ask what they would do. The Empress sat in a chair and read the letter. Without looking up from reading, she asked Matthias what had happened. Matthias said he had some amazing news concerning that bitch Vivian Lowry, the Emperor's young mistress. But seeing that the Empress did not respond, he stopped and called her again to get her attention. She apologized, explaining that she had received an important letter and had dropped it. Matthias asked what the letter said. She smiled and said that she would soon be able to get Carlyle a divorce. Meanwhile, the day of the Harvest Festival arrived in Pervaz, and Pervaz itself and its inhabitants were actively preparing for this day. Many things were new to the residents of Pervaz. They walked around Pervaz and could not believe what they saw. They had the feeling that they were in another country. Asha was busy keeping track of goods and affairs when a servant called out to her, saying that alcohol and meat had arrived from Elsir. Asha asked if this was the last cart, and the servant confirmed it, saying that there were already enough supplies, and this could be left just in case. Asha asked him to give it to the chef. The servant nodded obediently and headed in the other direction with the box. He left, and Asha stayed and continued to make sure that the Harvest Festival was a success and that no one missed anything, because in a long time, this was one of the most important days for Pervaz. The bells rang festively, informing the residents of Pervaz that the great celebration had finally begun. Dressed elegantly, Asha walked towards the people with Carlyle as the crowd cheered them on. The residents were delighted. They looked around, unable to believe what was happening, and could not get enough of it. The tables were filled with food, and every resident could take what he wanted. So many people simply had their eyes wide open and did not know where to start. Asha sighed tiredly. She had done a lot of work to make this holiday happen, and now she felt tired. But, exhaling and gathering her strength, she smiled and was ready to deliver the speech that the people of Pervaz were so eager to hear. She said loudly that today was a very important day in Pervaz's history after all the hardships and problems they had to go through. Carlyle nodded in support, and she continued, Asha saying that their land had been trampled by barbarians for a long time, but now the day had come when they would celebrate the harvest again. She said that the people of Pervaz deserved it and should fully enjoy the festival. Each of them made a huge contribution to the implementation of this festival. She said that thanks to His Highness Carlyle Evaristo, they would be able to celebrate the Harvest Festival, and they would celebrate for 2 whole days. Asha smiled and announced that it was time for the holiday to begin, and people began to rejoice and throw their hats into the air. They had been waiting for this day for a long time. The residents of Pervaz began to celebrate. They ate delicious food, drank good alcohol, and were happy. The boys and girls danced, and those who knew how to play instruments provided them with suitable music. Asha was not so much celebrating as making sure that the people of Pervaz had everything they needed. In the kitchen, she gave orders for the servants to continue serving food. Suddenly, someone's hand fell on her shoulder. Time they met, he supposed it must be hard to be so distant every time. Asha thought about it and asked him if it was really that hard, and if she should do it this way. After thinking a little more, she decided that she should. She put her hand on his shoulder, and Carlyle was nervous at first because he thought she was going to slap him. However, she grabbed him by the chest and very suddenly kissed him right on the lips. Carlyle was shocked. He never expected such a turn of events, but apparently his words about kissing led to this. Asha kissed him very awkwardly, but it was cute enough and amused Carlyle. He enjoyed this kiss, but he understood that in many ways this was the effect of alcohol, and it was worth stopping this effect so as not to lead to regrets. He gently pushed her away, noting to himself that although she didn't know how to kiss, her courage amazed him. Asha gently ran her hand over his shoulder, and at first Carlyle thought that something interesting was about to happen. However, Asha simply passed out. The alcohol in her body still took over, as well as the fatigue that had accumulated over this time. Carlyle caught her before she hit the floor and shook her gently to bring her to her senses. However, her whole appearance hinted that she was not going to wake up and was sleeping very deeply. Carlyle picked her up carefully and thought that he must be a little drunk too. Looking at tired Asha, he thought that the preparation for the celebration had been hard for her, and she was sleeping like a log more from fatigue than from alcohol. He jokingly told the deaf Asha that she had nothing to worry about and should rest, affectionately calling her a drunken wife. The next day, Asha woke up in bed with a severe headache, which she had never experienced before. She thought the pain was terrible and she would never drink again. And then she realized she was lying in a bed, and it was clearly not her bed. Carlyle, who was nearby, said that it was good that she woke up. However, she did not look very healthy. Asha was surprised by his presence here, but he sternly noted that she did not remember yesterday at all and that she should not drink so much, as it was fraught with irreparable consequences. She jumped out of bed and asked what had happened yesterday, and then it dawned on her that she was wearing different clothes. She threw off the blanket and made sure that this was really so. This embarrassed her very much. She didn't understand how this happened and what happened yesterday, and it scared her quite a bit. She was worried that she had done something bad and that she had offended someone. She looked at Carlyle nervously, not knowing what to say or ask. Carlyle thought cheerfully that seeing her so flustered made him want to tease her on purpose, and this was the same girl who had boldly kissed him yesterday. Asha was shaking from this situation. She was very worried, clearly playing out various negative scenarios in her head. And although Carlyle wanted to joke, seeing her state, he thought that he shouldn't do so, as it could aggravate her anxiety and have a bad effect on her. He decided to tell her directly about what happened yesterday and not add anything extra, leaving out only a couple of details. He said that yesterday he felt someone's presence near the bedroom and went out to check, after which he found Asha there, huddled and sleeping in the corner, and brought her here. Although he remembered the kiss, he thought it would be better not to mention it now, so as not to add unnecessary worries to Asha. She asked if she had only been sleeping, and Carlyle confirmed this, saying that she had not done anything else. Asha became nervous and jumped out of bed, asking what happened to the Harvest Festival. Because she had so much to do, she was worried if everyone had enough food and alcohol. She continued this chain of negative events, worrying about fights or if someone was lost, but Carlyle put his hand on her shoulder and told her to calm down. He said that everything went just great thanks to her efforts. He smiled and said that there was plenty of food and alcohol, and no one had any problems. Only a few children got lost, but they were quickly found and returned to their parents. Asha asked if anyone was disappointed by her absence, but Carlyle calmly pointed out that everyone was so drunk that they hardly noticed her absence. She exhaled and said that everything was fine then. Carlyle noticed that she was worrying about the wrong thing. He asked her if she was not at all interested in the fact that she was dressed in a nightgown and was in his bed in his room like that. Asha gasped and now realized again that she was indeed in different clothes and not in her own bed. She looked at Carlyle worriedly and said that he had said earlier that nothing had happened, but was that true? And why was she dressed like that? He sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, keeping a certain distance between them, and called her name. He expressed hope that she would fulfill the contract more carefully. Asha did not understand what he meant and asked for clarification. He asked her about the terms of the contract. Asha replied that according to these terms, she plays the role of his wife, and then they separate peacefully. He nodded and added that before they parted, he hoped that she would play the role of his wife well. He explained that he needed such steadfastness that if his mother started looking for pitfalls, she would not be able to find anything. Carlyle noted that she seemed to be taking this point rather lightly, but Asha said that she never thought so and took everything seriously. He sighed and said that it was obvious to anyone now that she was not like his wife, and they could easily be caught out. Carlyle asked if she thought the same, but Asha just thought that he himself hadn't previously treated her as a wife. He stood up and said that he felt she was having trouble, and that was why he decided to help her in this peculiar way. Carlyle said that since things had turned out this way, they should spread the word that they were a real couple. He asked her to tell everyone that she had slept in his bedroom the night before and not to say anything else, but she expressed doubt that anyone would believe it. He smiled, saying that if everything had been as usual, then no one would have believed it, because Asha was such an Asha, however. Yesterday she had been drunk, and this changed everything radically. Asha thought that this did indeed seem plausible, but she had some doubts. She looked at Carlyle and said that she really didn't understand why they had to go that far, because it seemed a little excessive. Carlyle turned back to her and said that, unfortunately, it had to be done. He explained that Matthias was making plans to get him out of Pervaz, and the Empress had listened to him and was plotting something to make it happen. Asha asked what they could do if the Empress was against them. Carlyle said they are currently seeking to have the marriage annulled and have some ideas on how to achieve this. He said that if this happens, he will have to return the money he invested in Pervaz and return to the Imperial Palace, and since their marriage is indeed a sham, there is a great risk that it will be annulled. Asha didn't understand how this could happen, and she was horrified by the consequences that Carlyle listed. Carlyle explained that Matthias had found a way to avoid going to war, and it would not have been easy for the Empress if her son had died on the battlefield. Carlyle said that if they spread rumors that they slept together, it would be difficult for the Empress to carry out her plans. He asked if Asha could handle it, but she squeezed her hand and remained silent. Asha thought that they should only pretend, and there would be nothing really critical about it, and so she said that she could handle it. She noted that everyone would be amazed, and Carlyle asked what was so surprising about that. He said that at a banquet in the Imperial Palace, it was not strange to wake up the next day in a stranger's bed. He said that, however, they had become closer as a couple today, and the Empress would stop nagging about this issue because now she would have no opportunity to do so. Asha swallowed and thought that she should do it, considering how much money Carlyle had invested in Pervaz, and if everything went according to the Empress's plan, it would be bad for all of them. Carlyle chuckled, asking that the Marchioness Pervaz not misunderstand him. He said not to take seriously how loving he would pretend to be and not to fall in love with him. She found this strange to hear, and she assured him that he had nothing to worry about, as nothing like that would happen. The second day of the harvest celebrations began, and, as Carlyle had correctly noted, the maids quickly spread rumors of their affair. They whispered that the Marchioness had spent the night in Carlyle's room and were happy for her. They whispered about whether Asha would really become a princess now, but another servant put them down, suggesting that they were making it up and that it was just a one-night stand. But they began to argue, saying that there had been a whole wedding ceremony. However, the servant besieged them, and soon the maids became depressed. They did not know what to believe and how to act now. The servant said that instead of gossiping, they would do better to get busy with business, of which there was a lot. Cecilia's maid was furious at this time. When she heard about these rumors, she couldn't believe them. She was indignant that Asha pretended to be disinterested and calm, and very cleverly deceived everyone. Cecilia agreed, saying that she seemed so unperturbed that even she hadn't imagined things could turn out that way. She thought that at the recent dinner, Carlyle hadn't even looked at her, so it all seemed extremely strange and suspicious. The maid assumed that Carlyle was a little out of his mind. Otherwise, he would never have crossed such a line and would not have spent the night with Asha. Cecilia noted that he might be drunk, but even so, he always remained sensible. This had been tested more than once. Cecilia asked the maid if she was sure that they had really spent the night together. The maid replied that she had heard this from the maid who had been ordered to enter their bedroom. That maid said that Carlyle had ordered the Marchioness to be changed and that it was quite a spectacular nightgown. Cecilia asked if that meant that nothing special had really happened and she had simply been changed. The maid lowered her voice to a whisper, saying that Carlyle too was dressed only in a nightgown. She also said that when the maid came out, they were in the same bed together, and this information angered Cecilia. The maid asked her not to worry too much, as it was most likely just playing with fire. Cecilia was annoyed. This was not what she had planned, and she didn't understand what Carlyle was thinking at that moment. Angie's maid tried to calm Cecilia down by saying that Carlyle would never have taken the Marchioness of Pervaz as his real wife. Angie noted that the only thing the Marquise understood better than Cecilia herself was combat skills. Cecilia told her that it was true, but only half so, and this answer surprised Angie very much. She did not understand what exactly her mistress meant. Cecilia wasn't going to deny that Marquise Pervaz was a great warrior. She told Angie that the people of these lands trusted the Marquise very much, and it wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. Angie began to understand where her lady was going with this, She wanted to express her thoughts, however. Cecilia continued to speak herself. Cecilia coldly remarked that all this was well and good, but it did not mean that Asha was capable of becoming empress. Cecilia chuckled because she knew that there was a huge difference between a good mistress and a good empress. She told Angie that as an empress, she was superior to Asha in everything. These words encouraged Angie, and Cecilia thought that it was still strange because it seemed that there was no special connection between Carlyle and Asha. But they spent the night together. She suggested that perhaps Asha still felt a threat from her. She imagined Asha spending the night with Carlyle and thought that the future emperor had a great weakness for drinking and celebrating. She finished her water and handed the glass to Angie, thinking that no matter what, she would never give in to Asha and would be the winner in this fight. Meanwhile, Carlyle gathered his supporters in his office as he needed to discuss the ongoing affairs. For now, he was simply thoughtfully rereading the new letter, which told about how things were going in the capital and what the people were thinking now. His mentor and Lionel were whispering very quietly to each other. They had business with Carlyle, but they did not dare distract him from his reading. The mentor encouraged Lionel to act, as he saw that Carlyle was in a good mood now, but Lionel was unsure whether he should even ask about such a thing. The mentor assured him that it was worth it, but Lionel, looking at Carlyle, felt great confusion, but still he understood that it was better to ask. Lionel broke the silence by saying that he had heard some very interesting news that morning, and Carlyle asked what it was. Lionel tried to sound as unperturbed as possible and asked if it was true that Carlyle had spent the previous night with the Marchioness of Prevaz. Carlyle looked at them in surprise, shrugged his shoulders, and answered casually that it was true. That's how it was. What they heard came as a bolt from the blue for both of them. They had expected different things, but not such an answer. Carlyle asked Lionel what interesting news he had heard, but Lionel explained that this was the interesting news. Carlyle chuckled, tapping his finger on the table, extremely amused that people found this interesting news. Lionel asked anxiously if Carlyle was very drunk at the time, but Carlyle calmly noted that he was drunk, but only a little. Carlyle's supporters were worried about what they heard. Lionel decided to clarify whether he understood Carlyle correctly in that he was not particularly drunk yesterday, but spent the night with the Marchioness. Carlyle looked at his mentor with a slight grin. He thought that he had rather strange desires, and he probably understood how unsuccessful Carlyle was as a husband. Carlyle addressed Lionel informally, calling him Leo, and said that although he was a close friend, he was extremely uncomfortable describing the details of what had happened in his bedroom yesterday. Lionel was embarrassed and apologized. He didn't want to go so far and find out these intimate details, but the mentor looked away with displeasure. He really didn't like everything he heard. Carlyle looked at his mentor with a grin. He thought that when he left, he should still explain the whole story to Leo so that he wouldn't worry about unnecessary things. Carlyle knew that since his supporters had asked him about it directly, rumors about all this were already circulating in Prevaz Castle, and he was curious to know how much the atmosphere in the castle would change now. Meanwhile, the harvest festival soon ended, and Asha helped the residents clean up the aftermath of the celebration. The castle's warehouses were completely filled with grain, and the mood of the inhabitants was very different from what it was before. A servant knocked on Carlyle's door with a smile and said that Asha wanted to visit him. Carlyle nodded and asked the maid to tell her that she could come in and that he was expecting her. Asha walked in and felt a little awkward, largely because of the rumors Carlyle had spread and how the people of Prevaz were now reacting to it all. Carlyle looked at her with a mischievous smile and asked her to sit down. Asha nodded and followed his words. The maid closed the door behind Asha, smiling brightly and happy that everything was going so well for her mistress with the Duke. As soon as the door closed, Carlyle laughed loudly, noting that the attitude of the servants had changed greatly. Although he had not asked, everyone immediately began to call Asha Her Highness. Asha was extremely embarrassed. She said that their attitude changed quite suddenly, and it was strange because she did nothing for it. Carlyle stood up, walked towards her, and noted with a smile that, on the contrary, this was something to be happy about, because it was a very good turn of events. He sat opposite her and said that by using the surname Prevaz, he even won a few points from Prevaz's people. Asha was surprised by this news. Carlyle confirmed that this was indeed the case, because they had been very harsh towards him before, but now they were smiling, even the head maid, who had previously been particularly cold towards him. And then it dawned on Asha, because all the servants were so worried and fussed because they thought that Asha would now become a princess. Carlyle continued to smile and said that the guests at the castle found this rumor extremely interesting, and perhaps it would even spread through the capital circles after they left. Asha asked if that were to happen, would they really be able to convince the Empress that it was true? To which Carlyle replied that it was unlikely that she would fall for such a deception, but that she would have to put up with it, since they were doing a pretty good job of maintaining the appearance of a marital relationship. Asha lowered her head sadly. She thought that if everything was going to be like this, then she would have to continue to endure all this attitude and the embarrassment that arose from it. Asha sighed heavily, thinking that the worst thing was that after this rumor spread, Nina began to act especially strangely. Asha recalled that recently Nina began to talk very often about her health and do rather strange things, in Asha's understanding. She recalled how Nina had convinced her to lie down so she could apply something strange to her face, convincing her that it would improve her health. Nina told her then that this was a folk remedy that improves health, but Asha herself heard about it for the first time in her life. Asha could then only sigh heavily and allow Nina to do whatever she wanted, since it was supposed to make her feel better. But this was only the beginning. Nina began adding medicinal herbs to the bath, saying that this was a necessary medicine and it would protect Asha from catching a cold. Then Nina began to apply a thick jelly with a strange smell to Asha's hair, saying that it would protect her from unnecessary headaches. Nina said that it was very important to take care of one's health, and that now she would take better care of her mistress. Nina noted that she felt guilty that she hadn't done this before, to which Asha only sighed and said that if it would console her, then she could do all of this. A few days later, Asha was in full dress. She was really looking forward to this day, because she had been preparing for it for so long. It was the day of the portrait, for which she had endured all these preparations, and put on a dress to which she had never become accustomed, since her usual clothes were much more comfortable. She opened the door and saw Carlyle's silhouette, sighing slightly from fatigue. She informed him of her arrival. Asha offered her sincere apologies for being late, explaining that she had to stay late due to preparations and all the necessary packing. Carlyle, looking at Asha, noted that her loyal maid's skills were very good, and he almost forgot how beautiful his wife was. Asha looked at him with confusion and said that she was the same as always. Carlyle noted with a smile that the maid who had done all this work and preparations would be very upset to hear these words. Asha still didn't understand what he was talking about, and thought that if one were to judge by beauty, then without a doubt, he was the most handsome person in this room. Looking at how blindingly bright he was, Asha thought that if they were painted together in a portrait, no one would even pay attention to her, because Carlyle's beauty was undeniable and overshadowed everything else. Meanwhile, at the imperial palace, the emperor's concubine, Vivian Lowry, met with the empress and made a polite curtsy as required by the rules, greeting her and wishing her good health. The empress noticed her, interrupting her conversation with others, and said that she was glad to see her. Vivian felt despondent. She was sure that the empress had called her here to do something nasty and put her in an awkward position. As Vivian sat down at the table with the others, the empress noted that everyone seemed to be present and thanked each person present for coming today. She said that today they would have a dessert recently developed by the pastry chef and black tea from Dumaray Island. The ladies began to chatter about wanting to try the pastry chef's masterpiece in black tea, but also expressed some concern. It was a feigned concern, one of the ladies remarking that it was the first time she had seen Miss Lowry at such an event, and that it seemed to her that this was not the most appropriate place for a mistress. Vivian looked at her coldly, hiding her confusion at these words. But, as she had assumed, the empress had deliberately arranged all this, and was trying to achieve exactly this effect. The lady in the green dress remarked wryly that she had no idea that Lady Lowry would be joining them today. The lady said that it was a great honor for her to meet Vivian, but Vivian herself thought that this bitch was just trying to hurt her with her sarcastic remarks. But Vivian knew how she should behave, so she just smiled modestly and said that she was happy to finally meet the noble ladies. She was only afraid that because of the age difference, they would not be able to get along. Another lady was surprised and asked how old Lady Lowry was this year. Vivian calmly replied that she was 25 years old, and the lady to her left was surprised, saying that she was the same age as her daughter. The ladies began to chatter about it, and Vivian only thought that there was nothing wrong with having fun at her age with an emperor who was old enough to be her father, because when she got pregnant, they would all crawl at her feet. Looking at Vivian, the lady in the green dress said that there are rumors that Vivian's estate is now visited by a priest who helps to have children, The other lady was very surprised by this news. The lady in green chuckled, suggesting that Viscount Lowry was dreaming of a child even at such a late age. Vivian gave her a cold look, because the Emperor had married her to Viscount Lowry to make her his mistress, and the Viscount himself had turned 60 this year. Vivian gritted her teeth. She wanted to tell the Emperor about all this, because in that case he would not leave it unpunished and the same Empress would get it in spades. But the Empress, with a smile, asked the lady in the green dress to leave her sarcastic remarks, because everyone knew that Lady Lowry was the Emperor's favorite and was trying to bear him a child. The Empress asked the lady to forgive her for the misunderstanding that had occurred and suggested that Vivian turn to her for help if needed. Vivian tried to smile sweetly and said that she would forgive the lady for this misbehavior due to misunderstanding. Vivian herself looked at the Empress and could not understand whether this was sincerity or the highest form of sarcasm. She became uneasy at the thought that the Empress believed that even if she gave birth to a son for him, he still would not be able to become the crown prince. Vivian smiled and said that she simply could not believe that even the Empress herself wanted to get her pregnant. It was so flattering and made her happy. Vivian said that since the Empress wished it, Vivian would make every effort to give birth to a son for the Emperor. They smiled at each other, but both of these smiles were full of deceit, treachery, and threat directed at each other. When everyone had left, and later the maid was combing the Empress's hair, she, remembering these gatherings, laughed loudly, which frightened her maid. She laughed louder and louder, because Vivian's arrogance and ignorance amused her in an unprecedented way. The maid asked anxiously what good had happened, but the Empress said that something very interesting had simply happened. She wondered how much sympathy she had earned today by showing that she had not kept Vivian in check, but she also knew that it was not enough and that she had to do something truly great that would allow her to defeat Carlyle. Meanwhile, in Pervaz, Fabian Rusco arrived to paint the portrait of Carlyle and Asha and greeted them. Asha smiled and greeted him back, saying that she was very glad to meet him, and the artist began to get out his tools. He smiled and noted that today he would only sketch out a few compositions. Asha was surprised, because she thought that the composition had been decided long ago. The artist shook his head and said that first he had to decide on a composition that would suit both of them, because only then would he be able to convey the love between them on canvas. Asha was in shock. She didn't understand how he was going to do this when in reality there was no love between them, and Carlyle just smirked at his thoughts. Taking Asha by the hand, he said that they must make an effort and live up to the artist's expectations. They assumed the pose the artist asked them to adopt and tried not to move so as not to disturb him while he painted. Asha bowed her head slightly and thought that this whole process was very awkward and uncomfortable. She would not like to repeat it again. After a couple of hours, the artist finished, collected his tools, and said goodbye to them. Asha thought that it seemed to her that a very long time had passed, but the sun was still shining very brightly, however. It was all extremely tiring. Carlyle asked why Asha looked so half-dead, since it only took 2 hours. Asha sheepishly admitted that she felt uncomfortable when someone looked at her so intently. Carlyle was surprised by this statement. Asha sighed. She didn't understand how one could not get tired of such activity. She turned her gaze to Carlyle. It was amazing to her. He had been on his feet all this time, but he didn't look tired at all. She looked at him very puzzled, completely not understanding how this was possible in principle, and whether he was even a person in this case. Carlyle chuckled and said that she was surprisingly shy, and now he understood and would take that into account. Asha stood up, doubtfully saying that perhaps all people felt embarrassed when they were stared at like that, but Carlyle couldn't agree with her. He explained that he could not agree with this, since he had been in the public eye since his birth. Asha looked at him and realized that he was right, and that she had not thought about it before. She sympathized with him, imagining what it was like, and said that it must have been very difficult. Carlyle wanted to say that he never thought it was hard, but looking back, he thought that at times it really wasn't the most comfortable experience for him, being the center of attention. He said that this must really have been the case, but Asha was surprised by this answer. Carlyle smiled softly and said that he agreed with her, and that looking back, it really had been difficult. Asha looked at him in surprise. She didn't really expect such an answer, but she was grateful for it. 2 months later, October arrived, and for the residents of Pervaz, it was the last harvest. Then November passed and winter came, for which the inhabitants began to prepare, and Asha and Carlyle watched them from the windows of the castle. Watching the snowfall, Asha said that it was beautiful, and she loved watching it during the war because during the war, snowfall marked a lull. Carlyle suggested that it also meant that many people died from the cold, and Asha agreed, recalling that there were many elderly people and children who died at that time. She said there had been cases where entire families had been found frozen to death, and many had had their arms and legs amputated due to frostbite. She shivered as if from the cold from these memories. Noticing this, Carlyle called her. He asked her to calm down, because it was a dark past, and now they were in a bright present. When he placed his hand on her shoulder, Asha flinched, the touch bringing her back to reality from those dark memories. She nodded, realizing that she had to stop thinking about those times. She said that everything was fine now, because they had survived and were well prepared for the current winter. She looked at Carlyle and said that all this was possible only because of him. Asha turned to the window and noted that no matter how much she would have to pay him back now, she would be ready for anything. Carlyle noted that it might seem unfair to her, but in Gyro, December is the most exciting month of the year, as people celebrate the end of the old year and the beginning of the new one. Asha didn't think it was unfair, but she asked how they celebrated such a holiday, and Carlyle replied that they had a party and invited close friends. He told her that they were making meat, strawberry jam cookies, and cinnamon drinks, and Asha smiled as she imagined it all. Carlyle looked out the window and said that they also exchanged gifts with each other. He walked up to the table, took the gift, and then returned with it to Asha, and said that it was a New Year's gift that he had prepared for her this year. Asha took the gift, but looked at it with surprise, and then turned her gaze to Carlyle and asked what it was. He reminded her that he had previously promised to give her a gift in December. He asked her not to be embarrassed and to open this gift. She followed his words and began to open the gift, but she felt extremely awkward because she herself had not prepared anything for Carlyle. Asha opened the gift and saw a beautiful medallion. She was extremely surprised to receive it. Carlyle explained that it was a hearthstone and asked Asha if she had heard of it. She said that she had heard of it. Carlyle helped her put it on and said that it would be even easier to explain then, adding that the locket contained a hearthstone. He explained that the stone was not very big, but could save her life in the future. Asha was very surprised, asking if this stone was not very valuable then. Asha touched this stone and gave herself the answer to this question. Of course, it was a very valuable medallion. Carlyle finished fastening the locket and stroked her hair one last time, while Asha quietly thanked him for the gift he had given her. Carlyle looked at her with a smile and said that for him it was a mere trifle, but he was glad that he had done something pleasant for her. Meanwhile, Cecilia, in her room, thanked her pigeon Pippi for his help, who brought her the news she wanted to know. She stroked him and unpinned the message from his paw, then unfolded it and began to read it. The message said that Prince Carlyle was going to summon the demon Karakesh. Cecilia knew that this was the topic of the 4th chapter of the Book of Hallmark. The epicenter was clearly the temple, and the Empress was using this for her own purposes. That is why it affected the middle class. Cecilia was surprised that anyone could actually believe that Carlyle wanted to summon a demon. She stood up and clutched the letter. Although it was surprising, Cecilia understood that the middle class was weakened, and therefore she should immediately inform Carlyle about it. She went to him, gave him the letter, and said that Pippi had returned with bad news, letting Carlyle read it himself. She stood silently by while Carlyle read the message. She could see that he didn't like the news. Carlyle calmly asked if they were talking about him, and both his mentor and Lionel, who were standing behind him, visibly tensed at the question. He asked Cecilia if it was true that he was summoning a demon, and she nodded. Then he asked her how he was going to do it. Cecilia sighed and said that there was a phrase in the 4th chapter of Hallmark's book that explained exactly how this could be done. She explained that it is possible to summon a demon if a person does not serve the Lord and sacrifices 100 people and sets fire to 10 temples. Carlyle sighed, asking rhetorically what they should do in that case. Burn temples and make human sacrifices. Lionel was furious when he heard this, saying that he had never seen such ungrateful people, because every time Carlyle won a battle, they fussed about organizing a triumphal ceremony and how pathetic they were behaving now. Cecilia assumed that the news would spread quite quickly due to its provocative nature. She said that it was unlikely that many people believed it, but nothing could be done about the fact that in their eyes, Carlyle's reputation was really tarnished. Carlyle let out a disdainful sigh, noting that it was now clear how Matthias wanted to take advantage of his position by presenting himself as an angel. Carlyle said that it seemed like Matthias wanted to get the most out of him, since he had been hiding behind his back all these years. but his mentor replied that this was all happening because the Empress had driven Carlyle into a corner and the people did not know his true face. The mentor said that this was why Carlyle's reputation had been so badly damaged by little rumors. Carlyle asked wearily what they intended to do about it. The mentor replied that if they wanted to strengthen their support, then some event had to take place that would show that Carlyle was an indispensable person. Carlyle noted that the only place he was irreplaceable was on the battlefield, and the mentor agreed that this was what most people thought. Carlyle looked at him thoughtfully and asked if he was proposing to start a war with the southern regions. Lionel was worried when he heard all this and asked how this was even possible. He didn't like the thought of this war. Carlyle looked at his mentor and said that there was no question of starting a war that was important to end by any means. He shook his head, saying the Crown Prince's job was to protect the lives of his people, not to abuse his power and put the country at risk. The mentor nodded, saying that he completely agreed with this and did not suggest declaring war. He explained that he meant that if such an incident were to occur, it would be to their advantage, to which Carlyle agreed, saying that in such a case, the situation would indeed improve quickly. Carlyle noted that before leaving for Pervaz, he had taken care of Albania and that no problems should arise for 3 years. The mentor nodded and said that he would think about another option. Carlyle said that he would need to meet with Zero sometime, get a feel for the atmosphere in society, and visit High Priest Gabriel. Carlyle thanked Cecilia, saying that he was in her debt again, but she said that helping him was a family duty that made her happy. Cecilia said that since there were no more questions, she would go, but if she was still needed, Carlyle could safely call her on personal matters. As she walked out the door, she thought that Carlyle surprisingly had a weak side, because declaring war was a good option, and now was the time when they shouldn't relax. She wondered if Carlyle had always cared about the lives of commoners, and that Viscount Lafelt was better off just playing the role of advisor, and whether Carlyle had figured out what she had meant when she said he might call her on personal matters. A few days later, Lionel informed Carlyle that the servants were quarreling again. Carlyle was extremely surprised by this fact, because these servants had recently been punished. He asked, displeased and slightly worried, what had happened this time. Lionel explained that it happened at the Pervaz training ground. The warriors of Pervaz Castle were clearing snow and chatting. The knights of Carlisle just stood by and looked at them with displeasure. They did not pick up shovels or clear away the snow. At one point, one of Carlisle's knights arrogantly ordered Pervaz's warriors to come and clear away the snow around him. Pervaz's warrior calmly said that this was their area and they should clear it of snow themselves. The knights of Carlisle began to say caustic things to them about how they were worthless and should be grateful to them. They began to quarrel because the knights of Carlisle attributed the laurels of the recent victory exclusively to the knights, and the warriors of Pervaz disagreed with this since they made a huge contribution to the victory. Soon, the offensive words turned into fistfights, and instead of working, people beat each other. Lionel sighed and said that, in short, that's exactly what happened. Carlisle sighed, and Lionel reminded him that he had warned him that the knights would be the most troublesome, since they would listen to no one but Carlisle himself. Carlisle asked Lionel if this news would reach the Marchioness of Pervaz, and Lionel replied that it certainly would. Lionel noted that if this was bothering Carlisle, he should go and visit her in person. Carlisle shook his head, saying that she was his wife and would come to him soon. Lionel noted that it would create the same atmosphere as when the servants were punished, and it was creepy, so he suggested that it would be better if Carlisle requested a visit to her. Carlisle sighed in exasperation. He didn't really want to do this, but Lionel's words made sense. He asked Lionel to request the visit on his behalf, but to do so discreetly so that no misunderstandings would arise. After some time, Asha came to the office at Carlisle's request and asked about the reason for the call. Carlisle noted that, judging by her expression, she already knew everything about the incident that had happened. Asha sat down, and Carlisle said that he acknowledged that his people had initiated the conflict, and he asked for forgiveness on their behalf personally. Asha coldly replied that she would gratefully accept the Duke's apology. Carlisle was sincere and once again asked for forgiveness for the fact that his knights began to insult the people of Pervaz. Asha said the feeling was mutual, and she thanked him for his apology. There was a silence, the awkwardness of which was most clearly felt by Lionel, who was present. Asha broke the silence, noting that everything was going smoothly today, but this incident could happen again. Carlisle agreed with her, and Asha continued that in that case, the problem would become more widespread than it was now. Asha suggested that this was not a problem that could be solved with words or threats, and Carlisle agreed that, unfortunately, that was the case. Lionel asked if they should start training together. Asha and Carlisle turned sharply to look at him. It was an unexpected offer. Asha asked in surprise if they would not then fight even more. Lionel noted that at the initial stage, this would most likely be the case, but they were all soldiers, and if they saw that their strength was on the same physical level, but Carlisle did not let him finish. He said, with a displeased look, that these words hurt his pride a little. Asha said that it hurt her pride too, and Carlisle mockingly asked if she meant that Pervaz's troops were stronger than his knights. Asha calmly said that in a battle of army against army they would lose, but in a one-on-one fight, Pervaz would win. Carlisle looked at her very arrogantly. This statement hurt him deeply, and asked if she was serious about it. Asha also looked at him seriously, and after a short pause, said that she was extremely serious when she spoke about this. Lionel, sensing the tension in the air, explained that he said this with the intention that they could develop respect for each other if they realized each other's strengths through training. But Asha and Carlisle were no longer listening to him, and seeing this, Lionel could only sigh because here he was already powerless. A few days later, the knights in the army of Pervaz were gathered. None of them were enthusiastic about this. However, when Asha and Carlisle were in the center, the disgruntled conversations died down, and everyone saluted them. The knights saluted modestly, and Pervaz's army effectively fell to their knees. Carlisle noted that this was all pretty cool, but wasn't they going too far? And Asha just shrugged and said that was just the way things were done. Carlisle was surprised, but then ordered the knights to stand still. He walked from afar and said that the weather was quite fine today. He went on to say that he had gathered everyone here to inform them that from now on, they would all be conducting joint military training together. Carlisle continued calmly. He expressed his confidence that some people did not like this news. After all, they had fought against each other not long ago. He said that such a decision was made because Pervaz's army was small in number and could not prevent an attack from the rear, and if Pervaz's troops were defeated, then the knights would also get it. He said that, be that as it may, they have a common enemy, and they need a system that will unite them. Asha watched the people and realized that although they expected contradiction, it was much stronger than they imagined. Carlisle continued by saying that the system would be the Pervaz mode, which would be a basic and useful system for the knight army. The knights began to protest, but Carlisle calmly retorted that the knights really knew better than the warriors of Pervaz about the barbarians in the land they had abandoned. The knight tried to object, saying that it was impossible to start a war in which the enemy was known down to the last detail. Carlisle coldly said that his statement was only true within the limits of his knowledge, and the barbarians fought individually, without any system, and they would easily stab them in the back if they continued to follow their complicated system, and it was better to take advantage of the knowledge of the Pervaz warriors. He noted that if they lose, their pride will become nothing more than a laughing stock. Realizing this, the knights and warriors of Pervaz began to train together, with Asha and Carlisle watching their training. Asha noted that if she were the commander-in-chief, the problem would be much more serious. Carlisle retorted that he remained of the opinion that the commander-in-chief should be the one who knew the enemy best. He said that nevertheless, she had done well not to be stubborn. Then he noticed Lord Solon and turned to him. It was the commander of the Haven Knights, Ezek Solon, and Carlisle wanted to fight him as the atmosphere was getting tense. Carlisle joked that he must have a lot of bitterness towards him, and this was a great chance to get revenge. But Solon expressed doubt that he would win. Although Carlisle offered him to start, Solon refused this opportunity. Carlisle smirked, warning him that he would regret this, and attacked him quite aggressively from the start. Solon barely managed to put up a defense, complaining that no one usually attacked so aggressively on the first attack. Carlisle smiled almost innocently and reminded him that he had warned him that if he gave up the opportunity to attack first, he would regret it. Solon didn't like this, but he didn't have many options, so he tried to attack Carlisle. Carlisle chuckled, parrying the blow with ease. He was enjoying this fight. They continued to fight, and Solon was getting worse. Carlisle mockingly noted that apparently Solon had been busy with administrative work all this time. After delivering a dangerous blow, Carlisle said that his fencing style had improved, but his muscle strength had noticeably weakened. Seeing Carlisle defeat Solon, both the knights and warriors of Pervaz began to admire it. Decker watched it with a smile. He laughed and said that in this way, Carlisle was closing the distance between them and that it was extremely honorable. Asha smiled softly as she thought about all this and said that it was indeed so. That same night, Asha and Decker were dealing with